Good day to you. God bless you. Welcome to Shepherd's Chapel. Welcome to this family Bible study hour. Ready to get back into our Father's Word here at the chapel? We invite you to get your Bible and join us if you care to. We're going to pick it up today with the book of Numbers, chapter 1, verse 26. Bamidbar in the Hebrew language, which translated means in the wilderness. And it's important, I think, that we realize that the wilderness in the Old Testament, you're talking about desert. And the people of Israel had it rough in Egypt. They were oppressed. They were bondage labor for Pharaoh's building projects. But for the most part, they ate very well. That'll be one of their first complaints as we start through the book of Numbers, that they miss the foods of Egypt, the garlic, the onions, the melons, the fish that came out of the Nile, and all we have is this loathsome manna that God provided when they had nothing else to eat. So the going's pretty tough. But when the going gets tough, the tough get going is the way I was raised. And we're going to see, though, the Army organized. And it's a good thing for the Army to be organized. God's leaving nothing to chance. And everything is organized and everything is disciplined when you do things God's way. In our last lecture, we ended with the first camp, or first division of the armies of Israel, and those three tribes that made up the first camp: Reuben, Simeon, and Gad, both sons of Leah, with the exception of Gad, who was of Zilpah. So let's ask that word of wisdom in Yeshua, Jesus' precious name. Father, we ask you to open eyes, open ears this day. We're going to pick it up today, Numbers chapter 1, verse 26, with the second camp out of 4 military divisions. Verse 26, and it reads, "Of the children of Judah," and Judah means celebrated in the Hebrew language, "by their generations after their families, by the house of their fathers, according to the number of the names, from 20 years old and upward, all that were able to go forth to war." Judah, also born of Leah, which was Jacob's first wife. Now, the order that we are going in here by tribes, remember in the first part of chapter 1, where we were introduced to the tribe princes that God selected, they were by order of birth, the birth mother for the most part. Now, in this listing of the tribes, it's according to camp. Which military division were they in? More on that when we get to chapter 2. Verse 27, "Those that were numbered of them," Judah, "even of the tribe of Judah, were 314,600. A score is 20, so 3 obviously 60, and then you add the 14,600, you come up with 74,600 fighting men in the tribe of Judah, by far the largest army of any of the tribes. And it will grow even larger by the time we get to the second numbering in the book of Numbers, for in chapter 26, the numbers of Judah will grow to 76,500. Verse 28, and again, that being a sign that they're being blessed. A good number of children is a sign of God's blessing. Reduction in numbers, not being blessed so much. And now on to the next 2 tribes in the second camp under Judah. 2 more tribes. "Of the children of Issachar," Issachar means he will bring a reward, "by their generations after their families by the house of their fathers, according to the number of the names, from 20 years old and upward, all that were able to go forth to war. Issachar, also a descendant of Leah. We see the tribes here listed by order of encampment, but it's kind of interesting to note that the birth mothers of the tribes seems to have something to do with it, because here we have Issachar, which will be under the banner I'm trying to get to the word here that I'm looking for, the ensign of Judah. Now, Issachar, by the way, by their generations, in the Hebrew generations, is Yalad. That's the same word we had in verse 18 for pedigree. So we're talking about proving who their family is. Verse 29, those that were numbered of them, even of the tribe of Issachar, were 54,400. And this would grow by 9,900 over the next 39 years. When we get to the numbering in chapter 26, Issachar will number 64,300. Verse 30, of the children of Zebulun, Zebulun, if you translate it, means habitation, by their generations after their families, by the house of their fathers, according to the number of the names, from 20 years old and upward, all that were able to go forth to war. And remember, this is all in preparation to enter the promised land. And the going will be tough. There are peoples who occupy the promised land, the Canaanites, of course, and God promised, though, He would give them the victory, that He would go before them, but it is going to be war. Verse 31, those that were numbered of them, even of the tribe of Zebulun, Zebulun born of Leah as well. So again, we see all three of the tribes in the camp of Judah are descendants of Leah, were 57,400, and they would grow to 60,500 in chapter 26. When we get to chapter 2, we'll see the camps, their total number, and when you add Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun together, by far the largest army of any of the four divisions that make up the armies of Israel at this time. So we have then our second camp organized, our division of the military, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. And when we get to chapter 2, we'll see that they're in place of encampment. This second army or second camp is on the east side of the tabernacle. Verse 32, on to the third camp, or the third army of Israel. Of the children of Joseph, namely of the children of Ephraim, by their generations, after their families, by the house of their fathers, according to the number of the names, from 20 years old and upward, all that were able to go forth to war. Now, Joseph was given a double portion as a result of what he did in saving Israel's bacon when they were about to starve to death. In fact, Ephraim means double fruit, and Ephraim being the younger son, Manasseh, the older son to Joseph. But when the blessings were being handed out by Jacob in Genesis chapter 48 and 49, he stated that Manasseh would be great, but Ephraim would be greater, and that the older would serve the younger. And we see Ephraim become the standard bearer for this third army, and Manasseh will fight under his younger brother's tribe, Ephraim. Verse 33, those that were numbered of them, even of the tribe of Ephraim, were 45,000. and this number would be reduced when we get to chapter 26 to 32,500, although in later years Ephraim would grow to be one of the largest tribe of the 10 northern tribes after the 10 tribes split away from Judah. Excuse me, verse 34. Of the children of Manasseh, here we have the older son of Joseph, by their generations, after their families, by the house of their fathers, according to the number of the names from 20 years old and upward, all that were able to go forth to war. Both Ephraim and Manasseh were descendants of Rachel. Rachel, of course, was the mother to Ephraim and Manasseh, as well as Benjamin, which will form the last tribe of the third army. So again, we see that the mother of the tribes had something to do with, evidently, the organization of the tribes. Now, and again, I'll point out that the Judah didn't choose Issachar and Zebulun to be on their team, if you will, in their army. Ephraim didn't choose Manasseh and Benjamin to be in their army. God decided who was going to be in whose army. Again, nothing left to chance. Verse 35, those that were numbered of them, even of the tribe of Manasseh, were 32,200, the lowest number, but not for long. They will grow to 52,700 in chapter 26, just a short 39 or 40 years later. Manasseh, by the way, if you translate it, means forgetting. And the last, but not least, of the armies of the third camp, verse 36, of the children of Benjamin by their generations. Now, Benjamin, most of you remember that Rachel named Benjamin Ben-Oni, which means son of my sorrow, and that she died in giving childbirth to Benjamin. Jacob would later rename Ben-Oni Benjamin, which means son of my right hand. After their families, by the house of their fathers, according to the number of the names from 20 years old and upward, all that were able to go forth to war. And I think I misspoke a moment ago in saying that Ephraim and Manasseh were of Rachel. Actually, Rachel was their grandmother. Rachel was the mother of Benjamin, however. Verse 37, those that were numbered of them, even of the tribe of Benjamin, were 35,400, and they would be blessed and grow by over 10,000 to 45,600 in chapter 26. So the third camp of the armies of Israel formed. The standard bearer Ephraim, and then followed by Manasseh and Benjamin. They would be assigned to the west side of the tabernacle in times of encampment. The tribe of Benjamin became quite distinguished early on in the history of Israel, in that and it would be several centuries following this, but the first man king, Saul, would come from the tribe of Benjamin, which added to the power associated with this tribe, in that the king of all of Israel was of the tribe of Benjamin. The Benjamites also distinguished themselves greatly on the battlefield. They were well known for their expertise with the bow and arrow and as archers. Verse 38, the fourth and final camp of the armies of Israel, On the children of Dan, Dan, if you translate it, means judge, by their generations after their families, by the house of their fathers, according to the number of the names from 20 years old and upward, all that were able to go forth to war. And this is the fourth and final camp. Dan, a descendant of Bilhah, which was the concubine that Reuben uncovered his father's nakedness with, he defiled his father's bed, as it states in Genesis chapter 49, verse 4. Verse 39, those that were numbered of them, even of the tribe of Dan, were 62,700. Again, a score is 20, so 60, is 60, and then you add the 2,700 for a total of 62,700. They would grow to 64,400 at the second numbering in the book of Numbers when we get to chapter 26. This would be the largest tribe, second only to Judah. Verse 4, of the children of Asher, Asher means happy or blessed if you translate it rather than transliterate it, by their generations after their families, by the house of their fathers according to the number of the names, from 20 years old and upward, all that were able to go forth to war. Asher, a descendant of Zilpah, which was a maid to Leah. Verse 41, those that were numbered of them, even of the tribe of Asher, were 41,500. And in chapter 26, their number would grow to 53,400. Verse 42, and the final tribe making up the armies of Israel and rounding out the fourth camp. Of the children of Naphtali, Naphtali means my wrestling, throughout their generations or pedigree, after their families, by the house of their fathers, according to the number of the names from 20 years old and upward, all that were able to go forth to war. Naphtali, the final tribe in our camps of Israel, a descendant of Bilhah, the concubine of Jacob, as well as Dan. So once again, we see it seems that the tribes that form the various camps, and again, remember, God chose who would be together. They didn't choose each other, but it seems that the mother of the tribes had something to do with the selection. Verse 43, those that were numbered of them, even of the tribe of Naphtali, were 53,400. That would be reduced in chapter 26, the last numbering before they went into the promised land, of 45,400. Verse 44, these are those that were numbered, which Moses and Aaron numbered, and the princes of Israel, those 12 that were handpicked by God in the first part of this chapter, being 12 men, each one was for the house of his father, one for each of the tribe. Again, and in verse 5, beginning there, we saw these chosen by God to be the leader of each of the tribes. Our fourth army, consisting of Dan as the standard bearer, Asher and Naphtali, they would be assigned to encamp on the north side of the tabernacle at times of encampment. Verse 45, so were all those that were numbered of the children of Israel by the house of their fathers, from 20 years old and upward, all that were able to go forth to war in Israel. And in our next verse, we have the grand slam total of the armies of Israel at this time. Verse 46, even all they that were numbered were 600,000 and 3,550. So 603,000 550 from the age of 20 who were able to bear sword and carry other types of weapons. Now, that's just fighting men. So if you take the fact and understand that many of the men, of course, were married, so they had wives. Many of them who were married had children, of course, and then you had the elderly who were no longer able to bear sword and shield. So I estimate that the population of Israel, the entire nation, including men, women, and children, was probably in the area of 2.1 to 2.2 million people. That's a lot of mouths to feed. That's a lot of water that would be needed. Plus, consider that they had their livestock with them. They had everything with them that they owned, because they're not going for a weekend picnic. They're relocating to the land of Canaan, was God's plan. Now, if you take a population estimate of 2.2 million, that would be a little less than the population of Chicago. The fighting men alone at 603,550, that is equal a little less than the population of Memphis, Tennessee. So that would be quite a sight coming over the top of the hill. All of these people bearing everything that they own with their livestock, with their herds and their flocks, quite a sight to see indeed. And then you consider that you've got the cloud representing the manifestation of God Almighty in front of them, leading them. And then when they did encamp at night, we had that pillar of fire coming from the tabernacle. Quite a sight to see. Verse 47, but the Levites, after the tribe of their fathers, were not numbered among them, and they were numbered separately in chapter 3, verses 14 through 29. Now, the priest line was numbered from the age, and let me back up from the priest line. The way God originally set up the service or the ministering of the tabernacle was that he claimed the firstborn of every man, woman, and beast. And you either had to redeem a child by making a contribution to the tabernacle, and there was a set price for boys and a set price for girls, depending on which was the firstborn. But if you didn't redeem them, you had to dedicate that child to the service or ministering of the tabernacle. That didn't work out so well, and God ended up taking the Levites in place of the firstborn, and he chose them because they stood with Moses when Aaron and the rest of Israel made the golden calf while Moses was up on Sinai. Verse 48, for the Lord had spoken unto Moses, saying, verse 49, only thou shalt not number the tribe of Levi, neither take the sum of them among the children of Israel. Levi, by the way, means joined, if you translate it, and Levi was also born of Jacob's first wife, Leah. Now, some would have you think that the reason God didn't number the Levites here was because they weren't part of the fighting men of Israel. That's not true at all. As I said just a moment ago, God chose the Levites because when Moses stood against those who made the golden calf, he said, who will stand with me and for God against these idolaters? And the Levites girded on their swords and fell in behind Moses. So to think that just because someone associated with the service of the tabernacle does not mean that they weren't armed and trained to use their weapons. Verse 50, but thou shalt appoint the Levites, and this word appoint is pakad in the Hebrew. It means to charge. So you charge the Levites over the tabernacle of testimony, and over all the vessels thereof, and over all things that belong to it. They shall bear the tabernacle and all the vessels thereof, and they shall minister unto it, and shall encamp round about the tabernacle. And I was careful to mention which of the directionals, north, east, south, and west, that the various army camps would camp, but you have to visualize the tabernacle when Israel came to a place of encampment. The tabernacle was in the center, and then you would have the Levites encamped around the tabernacle. Then you would have the armies of Israel encamped on the north, east, south, and west sides of the Levites and the tabernacle. Now, you had major families in the Levites, as we'll learn in the next several chapters, and some of them had different responsibilities as far as what parts of the tabernacle they were responsible for disassembling when Israel was getting ready to break camp and head out for the promised land. And then when they came to another place of encampment, they were responsible for reconstructing the tabernacle. Now, some of the Levites would have wagons and oxen for transporting the materials of the tabernacle, particularly the hangings and the beams. So some of it was pretty heavy, obviously, but some of it actually, the vessels, the furniture of the sanctuary were to be borne on the shoulders of the Levites. The Kohathites, for example, the tribe of Aaron and Moses, were responsible for bearing the Ark of the Covenant, and that was not to be done on a cart. The other two major divisions of the families of the Levites were known as Gershonites. One of Levi's sons was named Gershon, another Merari, and those were known as Merarites. Again, we'll see them assigned different functions in and around the tabernacle. And many people will think, well, you're talking about Levites. Weren't they all priests? No, not all of the Levites were priests. Yes, they all had responsibilities in and around the tabernacle, and in the time of Solomon, the temple of God. But to be a priest, you had to be a descendant of Aaron, who was a Kohathite. So again, not all priests are Levites, but not all Levites are priests, is a way to put it. Verse 51, and when the tabernacle setteth forward, the Levites shall take it down. And when the tabernacle is to be pitched or erected, the Levites shall set it up, and the stranger that cometh nigh shall be put to death. This word stranger is zur in the Hebrew language. It normally means a foreigner. I think in this case it means any non-Levite, and they would be put to death not by guards, but the Lord himself. And the penalty for violating the presence of the Lord was death for anyone who dared to come in contact with the Ark of the Covenant. Even the Kohathites, who were responsible for bearing the Ark of the Covenant, wouldn't dare march into the Holy of Holies and just pick up the Ark of the Covenant and take off transporting it. The priests, the sons of Aaron, had to go first and prepare the holy vessels and cover them before the Kohathites would come to bear them. Verse 52, and the children of Israel shall pitch their tents, every man by his own camp, 3 tribes making up each of the 4 camps, and every man by his own standard throughout their host. Now these standards you could think of as a flag. And well, I'll save that for chapter 2. We're almost there. Verse 53, but the Levites shall pitch or encamp round about the the tabernacle of testimony, that there be no wrath or no judgment, you could think of this, from God upon the congregation of the children of Israel. And the Levites shall keep, this word is shamar, or guard, the charge of the tabernacle of testimony. In other words, they were responsible to make sure that due reverence was made, that due obedience was made, and due care was made for everything that went on in and around the tabernacle. Verse 54, and the children of Israel did according to all that the Lord commanded Moses, so did they. Well, how long would this last? Well, unfortunately, you know men as well as I do. We all have trouble following God's instructions, and unfortunately doing things as God commanded Moses will not be the first priority on the minds of the people of Israel. Now in chapter 2, we're going to be talking about the order of encampment. And we covered in this chapter 1 the camps, the various camps, but there's something very interesting about these camps, and I mentioned the standard of each of the various camps, and we're going to find is a flag with a representation of one of the constellations in most cases. Now, we're not going to be talking about astrology in our next lesson, but we're going to be talking about astronomy. And there's a big difference between astrology and astronomy. Astronomy, we learn in Genesis chapter 1 that God placed the lights in the heavens, and he had a reason. It wasn't just haphazard, or just as we had the selection of the camps. That wasn't haphazard or by man's design. It was God's design. And if you have a problem with talking about astronomy, you might want to give, if you have a companion Bible, give the 12th appendix a read before we come back and cover chapter 2. It might help you understand what we're talking about. But there's something very special in these standards that we see, and there have been 2 people who have seen the throne of God and written about it. Ezekiel 1 in Ezekiel chapter 1, and John, who was taken in the Spirit to the Lord's day, and in Revelation chapter 4, he describes what he saw in the throne of God, and I think it's pretty sure thing that it's to do with these standards for the tribes of Israel. Got a short message. We'll ask you to listen a moment, won't you please?